Good morning, Monrudy. Can you hear me? Good morning, sir, from Umwa. Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Ma'am Rose.
Hello.
Can you hear me po?
Yes, I can
Good
hear you
morning.
well.
Hi. Good morning. This is Attorney Armandula. I'm using Sarah's assistant. So, if you can see me and hear me clearly lang po, if you could verify.
I
Ito
can.
na po yung magiging setup natin for later.
Yes, I can hear you and see you clearly. Thank you.
That's very good, ma'am. Thank you po. Okay po.
You can hear me as well, right?
Yes, it's good to meet you, Miss Chihoko. I am Rose. I can hear you and see you very well.
I'm not Chihoko. My name is Mon.
I am sorry.
Chihoko.
I'm
Chihoko
Juan.
is
Sorry.
she will try to log in at about 6:15. Is it? Yeah, 6:15 in 15 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Hope all goes well. Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Mm.
Ma'am Rose.
Yes, po.
Hi. Sorry, I just wanted to ask. We're in charge of muting and unmuting our own microphones for later, no?
Yes, because you Saxtara was made co-host, but
Right. Okay. So we can do that for her.
everyone else, they cannot unmute on their own.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay.
Armand, I'll be coming back in a while, so I'll turn off my video first.
Sure, Ma'am Rose. Thank you very much.
Okay, focus na ako. Hello.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning! Sino to? Angel?
Si Rose, sir.
Hi, Rose. Hindi kita makita.
Ayan na.
Ayun!
Beauty ko.
Grabe. Anong style? Dapat Philippines tapos ngalan? O tama yung ginagawa namin? Ano yung naming, naming protocol mo?
Tama lang yan. Wala kaming naming protocol, sir. Basta
Okay.
gagawa lang ang ngala.
Okay. Yung itsura, pas hindi magwa, basta ngalan gagawa, okay lang, no? Kaga-aga.
Nakikita naman namin, sir, sa participants. Sorry?
7:30 ba sa inyo? Amo na
Oo.
galing ko para hindi namin tindihan.
Oo, gani. Damo na actually ang nasa room.
Nakasunod na sila tanan?
Hindi man. Ang mga co-organizers, ang mga nila, ang mga assistant nila ara na.
Grabe, si Glady, harap pa nagali sa inyo.
Oo.
Uli na siya. Nakita ko na
Hindi
yung
pa.
mga kanya itong
Not
list.
within this year.
Very good. Tamo pa kinang lantaw. And Dennis is with you already. Very good.
Wala kami tao, sir. Kayo tatlo ang mapuli subong tuig.
Dennis is with you na. And then who else? Dennis would be recruiting si Unica at saka si Emily Discaliar.
Oh, wow. Sige. Umuha kami dito nan.
Hindi,
Angel,
pinadahig sila umwa. SRMO na daw sila lahat.
Ay,
Oo.
basta dating umuha pa rin.
Oo, siyempre. Ang ganda ng background ni Yusek.
Oo, gani. Nami, sir, no?
Very good. Would you know would you guess na iisang lang kami, nasa office pa kami pareho. Magkaibang conference room lang kami. Dun sa kabilang conference room, dito ako sa kabila.
Pero ang background, virtual na or actual?
Actual.
Wow, talagang set up.
Oo, kasi kailangan yan. Daming meetings and everything. And then the secretary wanted to have to identify yourself as DFA. Nakikita ganun ba? So in your official meetings and the forum, parang the secretary wanted something like, or the department din, makes you feel guilty na hindi ka magsalita ng maayos eh. Kasi kitang-kita yung background mo, yung department, you're carrying the name of the department. Not only your name.
Oo, gani, sir. Diri kami sa sa conference room. Diri ang setup ng
sa conference room sa
fourth floor.
Sa fourth floor, sa PM, sa my friend Ariel is already inside the room.
Yes, sir.
Grabe. Complete.
Complete. Sir, mamute anay ko.
Ako man, sige. Okay lang.
Kay masabat ako sa mga messages.
Okay.
Copy po ng program.
Okay. Magkasunod kami ni ma'am.
Opo, ito po yung
Okay. Lead batter pala si ma'am. Hola. Ganda ng ano. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning or good afternoon.
Oh, welcome, Eduardo.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
You're most welcome. We're honored to have you. I can hear you well and see you, so our connection
Okay.
is okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. I'll see you later.
Okay.
Miss Rose, this is Ray.
Good morning, Ray.
Good
Good
afternoon.
good evening to you.
Good evening. Yes.
Can you hear me
Actually,
well?
yes, I can hear you well. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear and see you well.
Great, thanks. So I don't need to wear earphones then.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
See you later.
Later.
In about 10 minutes.
Yes.
Hi, just testing this as well. If you can hear me, that's fine.
How are you, Michelle? I can
Good,
hear you and
thanks.
see you well.
Thanks, Rose. Sorry I missed the practice one last night, but glad that it
No
works well.
worries. It's okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Okay. Okay,
Hello.
Good to
should I
see you,
move?
ma'am.
Okay. Can we, lilipat? We're going, I'll move closer. Aray ko.
Ye-
Aray
Yes,
ko.
ma'am. Oo. Medyo malayo ka.
Ayan, sige. This is better? Okay, this
Yes,
is
ma'am.
better na. Okay. Okay, this is better. Aray ko. Okay. Asek, how are you?
Yes, ma'am.
Nakaano
Could
pa
you hear
siya?
me? Could you hear me clearly? Yeah.
Ayan o,
I am
sige.
Ambassador Toy.
I can hear you, Asek.
Okay, thank you. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All good.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, sige. Okay, we can
Oh, Michelle.
Start in 8
Okay.
minutes.
It's been a long time I haven't seen Michelle Boy.
Nice to see you. How are you?
Good to see you, Michelle.
Great to see you, Enrico. Yeah. Mhm.
Let me remove my mask.
Are you based now are you in the Philippines right now?
Yes. I'm
Oh, great.
here in Manila.
Great.
But we're still
Wow.
doing migrant workers. Um,
That's great.
especially women migrant workers.
I can imagine. And you'll be speaking today, won't you?
Yes, and very short.
Good.
Short. Just
Yeah.
some points.
Looking forward to hearing it, as always.
Thank you,
I can
Michelle.
imagine. It's a big challenge that you all have now, I think, especially with the pandemic.
Yeah,
So many
right.
people come. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's great that you're able to organize this. I think you were saying, Rose, in the email that there's quite a few people registered, so I do hope that it's good. It'll get some good participation.
I think they said that it's about 200 as of yesterday. 200 had registered for this event. So
That's great.
even if you get 50% of that, that's about
Exactly.
it's very important for us to deliver the message of what have been the lessons learned from the regional reviews and in relation to the SDGs. Hi, Craig.
Exactly.
How are you? You haven't gone back to Geneva, Craig, no? For some time
I
now?
just received my administrative privileges. I wasn't able to unmute until just now. Somebody just linked me in. So thank you very much. No, I'm in New York.
Yeah, the last time I saw you was during the negotiations for the GCM. But since then, you haven't been transferred back to the headquarters, no? You're still
No,
in.
I haven't been sent back to I haven't been punished in that way just yet.
So it's nice to see you. I
Nice to see you again. Nice to
see
see
you in a
everybody.
bit.
So I guess we're 6 minutes away from go time. If anyone has any special instructions for me as moderator, I'd be happy to hear them.
I just want to make sure that you can hear me.
I can indeed.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
That's Ola.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
from IOM, regional director in Brussels.
Yes, indeed.
Hi,
Good afternoon.
Ola.
Hi, hi everyone.
Very good. Okay, I think we're all set. In 5 minutes, we will kick off. Hello, Jonathan. Nice to see you. Yeah, I'm hearing to our organizers, I'm hearing from Jonathan that he's not able to unmute himself, and I don't seem to have, wait a minute, yes, I do.
I thought it was.
Sorry, I've muted you and now I can't unmute you. Hang on just one second. No, so I don't have the power to mute or unmute speakers, so I'll rely on the organizers to do that as I call on them. Jonathan, good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning to you. I thought it was a plot of yours to silence me.
No plot could ever succeed, Jonathan. I've learned one thing in the last 20 years.
Very good to see you.
Nice to see you. So we're 1 minute away, and we will start on time at 7:30. I'll rely on the host to unmute speakers when I call on them, since I don't seem to have access to that control.
Good morning, Craig. All our speakers in the concept note have co-host status, so they can unmute themselves.
Okay, I think Jonathan was struggling. So you have that power now, Jonathan? Great. Very good. Well, it's 7:30 in the morning, New York time, so let's get started. Welcome to this side event of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development on advancing the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration, looking at key lessons from the Global Compact on Migration regional review processes, and in particular at inputs from the Asia-Pacific and the Europe regions. My name is Craig Mokhyber. I'm with the United Nations Human Rights Office. I'll be moderating our discussion today, and I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. A special and very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers. We've put together a terrific panel to talk about this subject today. And in this virtual side event, we will focus on the key lessons learned from the regional reviews of the Global Compact for Migration, both in Europe and in the Asia-Pacific region. The Global Compact for Migration is a collective worldwide commitment to improve the governance of migration by putting migrants and their human rights at the center of all policies and measures. It provides a clear path toward coherence on migration governance, one built on cooperation, solidarity, and respect for fundamental human rights. And it recognizes that the central commitment of the SDG agenda to leave no one behind will remain unfulfilled if migrants are unable to migrate in safety and in dignity. Well, today, the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the disproportionate vulnerability of migrant communities. Vulnerability that often comes about as a result of structural inequalities and of deliberate policy choices that exclude and marginalize migrants. In recognition of this, the overarching message that came out of the regional reviews was the imperative need to address such inequalities and inequities in migration governance, which is essential if we are to succeed in building back resilient, equitable, and inclusive societies in the aftermath of this pandemic. The first International Migration Review Forum will be held next year in 2022. In its substance, it should be built on the wealth of experience and insights and analysis that have already been shared with the regional review processes, including through the voluntary reviews submitted by member states. It should also benefit from the rich and multidimensional discussions that continue to take place at the regional and global levels on progress toward the achievement of the SDGs. And the forum should take account of the procedures that were put in place in the regions to ensure open and inclusive participation of all relevant stakeholders in the review meetings, bringing to the table member states, but also UN system partners, civil society actors, migrant associations, national human rights institutions, trade unions, and local authorities, to name but a few. The International Migration Review Forum must be ambitious. It must be comprehensive and it must be holistic. And it must be as deeply rooted in the 2030 Agenda, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the norms and standards of international law, and the UN Charter as it is in the Global Compact on Migration itself. As an executive committee member of the UN Network on Migration at global and regional levels, the UN Human Rights Office is proud to stand alongside all of our UN colleagues to offer support to member states and to other stakeholders to advance the commitments made in the Global Compact and in the SDGs. The regional reviews are revealing important lessons on how this can be done. And we have with us today a truly impressive panel of speakers who will unpack some of those lessons for us. I'm going to introduce each one of them as they speak. But my first honor today is to give the floor to His Excellency Enrique A. Manalo, who is the permanent representative of the Philippines to the United Nations, and he's going to offer some welcoming remarks. He himself is a strong advocate of human rights-based migration policy. And Ambassador Manalo, before his posting in New York, was Undersecretary for Policy of the Department of Foreign Affairs. He served as Acting Secretary of Foreign Affairs, essentially the Acting Foreign Minister of the Philippines, from March 9th to May 17th of 2017. We're very pleased to have him with us. And Ambassador, you have the floor. I'm sorry, Ambassador, you are still muted, so you will need to unmute yourself. We'll ask for your patience, ladies and gentlemen, as we solve our technical issues. And we still are not receiving audio, Your Excellency. I'm sorry. We'll ask for the assistance of our colleagues at the mission to help us with the technical difficulties on the ambassador's audio.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. On behalf of the mission of Portugal to the UN Economic and Social Council for Asia and the Pacific, the UN Network on Migration, Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants, and the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, I would like to welcome you to this virtual side event. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, which was adopted in 2018, with overwhelming support from member states, called for the establishment of the International Migration Review Forum, which will be conducted in 2022. GCM reviews of the Global Compact on Migration in the Asia-Pacific and Europe regions have shown good and very promising practices and lessons learned. Our distinguished panelists will share inputs on the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration from the regional reviews and from institutional and country experiences. My country steadfastly supports the Global Compact for Migration and is an advocate for the promotion, protection, and fulfillment of the human rights of migrants, regardless of migratory status. The positive contributions of migrants have helped promote sustainable development in countries of origin, transit, and destination. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries have relied on migrant medical and health personnel as frontline workers. Migrants also make up a disproportionate share of the workforce in areas that remained open and active throughout the periods of lockdown, such as in logistics and delivery. As a GCM champion country, the Philippines has internalized and implemented the Global Compact for Migration. The details of this will be elaborated upon by the distinguished panelists from my capital. Our panel will elaborate on the outcomes of the regional reviews, the links between the implementation of the GCM and the achievement of the 2030 Agenda, country experiences in implementing the GCM, and perspectives from civil society. This event is timely, not only as a preparation to the conduct of the IMRF next year, but in light of the focus of this year's high-level political forum on SDG 10, reducing inequalities, the only goal in the 2030 Agenda that speaks of migrants. I welcome you all, and I look forward to an interesting and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you.
Well, our very sincere thanks to the ambassador for kicking us off with those very nice words. Thank you very much for being with us. So now we are going to get an overview from Jonathan Prentice, who is the head of the Secretariat of the UN Network on Migration. Jonathan has been a UN colleague in this endeavor for many, many years. He's worked at the United Nations since 1994, having been posted all around the world from Baghdad to Dili to Geneva to Jakarta, New York, and Phnom Penh. He's also worked for the International Crisis Group and as Chief of Office for the Secretary General's Special Representative for International Migration during the formative years of the Global Compact on Migration and its predecessor. Since 2019, he's been responsible for heading the Secretariat of the United Nations Network on Migration. Jonathan, thanks so much for being with us, and over to you.
Great. Many, many thanks. And indeed, it is a real honor to participate in this meeting and to come after such two great opening interventions, much of which I will repeat. Craig, you and I are on entirely the same wavelength, which is always extremely reassuring. But I think in the repetition, you will see the emphasis on what we believe to be truly critical about the way forward. Firstly, this event really does come at a timely moment for a number of reasons. I think one of the great achievements in the Global Compact, and there were many great achievements, was the commitment of member states to ensure to lock in a regular process of follow-up and review, the ability to assess the progress made in the implementation of the Compact, what outstanding challenges there remained to be overcome, and that this process of review would be fully inclusive. And of course, we're heading towards, as Craig mentioned, the first global review, the IMRF, which will take place in the first half of next year, as in some ways migration as an international issue comes back to New York. And a huge part of the education leading up to that will be the process of the regional reviews that began with Europe at the end of last year and will culminate with Africa's review at the end of August, beginning of September. It's appropriate too that this event is part of the HLPF week, the high-level political forum, because of course the GCM is rooted in the 2030 Agenda, and sustainable development is one of the 10 guiding principles of the GCM, the guiding principles being the DNA of this framework. The recognition, I think, both in the Agenda 2030 and in the GCM, that migration is a multi-dimensional reality and is of significance to all states. And again, echoing Craig, I think it is worth reiterating that this event and this discussion takes place at a moment in time when, largely driven by the COVID-19 pandemic, issues concerning migrants and migration remain very much at the fore, often for reasons which are a source of some distress. The mobility restrictions that have been placed throughout the world, the ongoing lack of equitable access to healthcare and vaccines, the job losses and decent work deficits that have disproportionately impacted some sectors of our communities, including migrants. And of course, ongoing, sometimes increasingly virulent xenophobia, discrimination, and exclusionary narratives that we see all too often. And yet this, of course, is juxtaposed against the recognition in many quarters of the crucial importance of migrants in keeping their societies running during this very turbulent time. So I would suggest at the outset that we are still some way off attaining the full realization of migrants' basic human rights, or achieving narratives in which migrants need not be categorized as illegal, as victim, or as hero, but are just simply permitted to be. However, it is through events such as this that it is possible to see, I hope, and I believe, the growing affirmation of the role of the Global Compact, of the GCM, in moving us towards this goal. And particularly here, I would like to highlight the achievement in the GCM in recognizing that this required multi-dimensional forms of cooperation within government, between governments, within and between societies. Indeed, that fundamental notion of cooperation within and between states to address inequalities is as central to the GCM as it is as central to the SDG agenda. And here I must pay tribute really to the governments of the Philippines and Portugal, who have been really leading proponents of these efforts, nationally and internationally. And I'd like to thank them here for their support for the multi-partner trust fund that the GCM called for and is now up and operational. They are, of course, part of the GCM Champions Initiative, now numbering 23 states, and they were both actively engaged in their regional reviews of the Global Compact. The first of these, for Europe, involved over 200 government and stakeholder participants. Earlier this year, the review in the Asia-Pacific region brought together 34 member states, 44 stakeholder organizations. Both these reviews were preceded by stakeholder consultations and involved in the review itself stakeholder engagement, and both involved the support and participation of the UN system. These contributions now form part of the Migration Network Hub, our effort through the GCM to support all partners in developing a repository of information and practice, a resource for peer-to-peer exchange, and a discussion space to further bring together the GCM community. Now, I would like to say just a few words on what seems to us, from an initial review of the regional reviews, to be areas which perhaps might need more focus. It is striking how little discussion there has been to date on the issues around legal identity and adequate documentation, for example, Objective 4 of the GCM, or, importantly, on the predictability of migration procedures called for in Objective 12. And finally, and I would say of great relevance in this forum and of immense importance to migrants the world over, the issues around the portability of benefits, again articulated in Objective 22 of the GCM. So I very much hope that we can reflect on these gaps, and there are others, as we move towards the IMRF. Again, as Craig says, this presents a vital opportunity. It is the first such forum, so we do have that moment to pitch the level of ambition that we want the international community to aim for, and ensure in our discourse that we uphold and maintain the guiding principles of the GCM. Through the network, we will prepare a roadmap for you and for our stakeholder partners to offer guidance as to how we get from here to the IMRF itself. And of course, this will also be preceded by a report of the Secretary General offering guidance as to the way forward. In conclusion, thank you very much for this opportunity. It is vital that the HLPF address full-on the issues that will be discussed today, and I very much hope that other fora on the multilateral circuit will be able equally to integrate the GCM and the concerns of migrants into their deliberations, and we stand ready to work with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Extremely helpful as usual, as we're used to getting from you on all of these discussions. I mean, for sharing all of those insights and not only giving us some of the feedback from the reviews, but helping to plot the next steps forward as we move toward 2022. I think that's extremely helpful as well. And I have recorded well your appeal to all of us to try to move to a world in which the categorization of migrants ends and we begin to look at them only as human beings, or as you put it, that they just be permitted to be like all of us. I think that's an excellent way of summarizing it. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. Now we're going to go to our panel now, and we're going to get just 6 minutes or so from each one of our panelists before we open up for a discussion with all of you. When we get to the discussion phase, we're going to ask you to signal either your question or your interest in taking the floor in the chat box. But first, as I say, 6 minutes from each one of our panelists, and we're going to begin with Undersecretary Sarah Lou Ariola, who is the Undersecretary for Migrant Worker Affairs in the Department of Foreign Affairs in the Philippines. Ms. Ariola is chair of the International Migration Review Forum of the UN ESCAP region. She is the Philippine chief negotiator in the negotiations of the Global Compact for Migration. And before joining government, she was a lawyer at the Ateneo Human Rights Center and program officer for the Working Group for ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism. So Ms. Ariola, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Craig. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to the United Nations Network on Migration, UN ESCAP, and the Permanent Mission of Portugal to the United Nations for this opportunity given to the Philippines to share its learnings from the recently concluded Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the implementation of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. As a GCM champion country, the Philippines has been steadfast in articulating the importance of migrant protection in its bilateral and multilateral engagements. The Philippines has also been at the forefront of a resilient government response in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. I had the privilege of being elected chair of the first Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the implementation of the GCM. The importance of the regional review cannot be overstated. It allowed states to take stock of the progress of the implementation of the GCM. It shed light on migration issues that need urgent attention. It also provided a venue for dialogue on how to address challenges in the implementation of the GCM. And most importantly, it recognized the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic on migration. What was remarkable about the regional review was the fact that it included not only member states, but also international organizations and various stakeholders in the discussion. The regional review provided a platform for various sectors to be heard. The dialogues, therefore, were constructive, engaging, and pivotal towards our ultimate goal of improving migration governance in the Asia-Pacific region. Allow me to share with you some of our main lessons from the Asia-Pacific Regional Review. First, is the wide recognition of the positive contribution of migrants and their families to sustainable development, whether they are in countries of origin, transit, or destination. Specifically, remittances were seen by countries of origin as a major source of income, which contributed to poverty reduction and improvement in the livelihood of citizens. For countries of destination, meanwhile, the need for human resources was filled by its migrant population, creating this indelible link between migration and development. Thus, we see that it is in the best interest of all countries to aim for safe, orderly, and regular migration, which is what the GCM is all about. Second, representatives from all sectors were unanimous insofar as the COVID-19 pandemic had exacerbated the vulnerabilities of migrants and exposed them to an increased risk of infection, lack of access to public health services, and an availability of opportunities for decent work. In addition, migrants face xenophobia, stigma, discrimination, and inadequate protection and support services. Thus, member states, international organizations, and stakeholders echoed the need for migrant social protection and the measures for inclusion, especially during a crisis. Calls were made to respect the rights of migrant workers, regardless of migration status, age, gender, sexual orientation, race, and ethnicity. On a positive note, the COVID-19 pandemic has prompted member states to set up their response to support and protect migrants. Some good practice identified were the support for voluntary repatriation of distressed citizens, extension of stay and work permits, and increased consular assistance. Third, we learned that many member states had developed national implementation plans on the Global Compact, including the mainstreaming of the objectives of the GCM and the embedding of the same in their respective national laws, regulations, and policies on migration. For example, the Philippines introduced a new chapter in its National Development Plan, which is now a key part in our implementation of the GCM and aims to ensure the safety and protection of both Filipino migrants abroad and foreign nationals in the Philippines. Other positive developments reported by member states include establishment of national coordination mechanisms, improved transparency and simplification of migration procedures, improved access to regular migration pathways, and reduced costs of migration and remittance transfers. Fourth, member states, international organizations, and stakeholders alike identified the lack of comprehensive and disaggregated data on migration and migration-related indicators as one of the significant challenges in the implementation of GCM in the Asia-Pacific. Hence, member states suggested the possible provision of technical assistance by the UN Migration Network on Migration to improve collection and dissemination of relevant migrant data for evidence-based policy making. Finally, the review underscored the importance of regional collaboration in advancing GCM implementation on the ground and the leadership of the Asia-Pacific region in applying a whole of society and whole of government approach. It acknowledged the importance of global cooperation and partnerships on international migration, realizing that indeed migration governance is a shared responsibility by all countries. It was a very important for the Philippines to chair the very first Asia-Pacific Regional Review because during the negotiations of the GCM, the Philippines lobbied for the inclusion of decent work and fair and ethical recruitment provisions as inspired by Target 8.8, the Sustainable Development Goals on the promotion of safe and secure working environments for all workers, including migrant workers, in particular women migrants and those in precarious employment. Our lobbying was successful as decent work and fair and ethical recruitment provisions are now codified under Objective 6, Section 22, paragraphs G and H of the GCM, thanks to traditional and non-traditional partners we created during the negotiations. It is also within this context that the Philippines sought to breathe life to Goal 17 of the SDGs by forging global partnerships with countries of destinations such as Saudi Arabia and Bahrain to support them in their groundbreaking efforts to reform their respective labor systems. As you may already know, Saudi Arabia rolled out its labor reform initiative last March 14. These reforms, which grant more labor mobility to migrant workers, will significantly improve their working conditions in the kingdom, including those of more than 800,000 Filipinos. Last June, a high-level delegation of the Philippines was sent to Saudi Arabia by President Duterte to show our country's full support for the labor reforms. During the visit, the Philippines, a country of origin, and Saudi Arabia, a country of destination, agreed to bring its partnership on labor issues to the international stage, particularly at the International Migration Review Forum in 2022. Moreover, this new partnership has presented an opportunity for cooperation on other cross-cutting issues such as human rights, counterterrorism, public health, investment, and socio-economic development. Regarding our partnership with Bahrain, I wish to highlight the successful conviction and prosecution of 8 human traffickers before the High Criminal Court of Bahrain in April 2020. 2 Filipino victims who survived sexual exploitation bravely executed their statements in the Philippines against their traffickers. Their statements were admitted in Bahraini courts and led to the human traffickers' prosecution, apprehension, and eventual conviction in Bahrain. The close coordination between the Philippines and Bahrain has paved the way for the Philippines to maintain its Tier 1 status for the sixth consecutive year in the U.S. State Department's Trafficking in Persons report, while Bahrain has maintained its Tier 1 status for the fourth consecutive year. Well, it's only been around 2 years since the GCM was adopted globally. It is undeniable that the GCM has already started to produce real and tangible change around the world. Thus, I encourage everyone, champion and non-champion countries alike, to participate in this trajectory towards a better and more inclusive global migration governance framework for the achievement of our 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Undersecretary Arriola, for that. Excellent summary of the what's happening in the Asia-Pacific rule in particular, and the role of the Philippines, and really for the emphasis on those issues that we all need to be focused on: denial of economic and social rights, xenophobia, discrimination, social protection, the intersecting discriminations that migrants often suffer because of other categories to which they belong, the impact of the COVID crisis. And I think there's a very good suggestion about getting the Global Compact into national law and policy as well, managing cross and remittances and strengthening data, and of course that very strong point at the end on international cooperation and partnership as well. So thank you very much. We've got some more panelists who are going to speak to us today. I'm going to tell the panelists that because I'm a bad chair, we are actually over time. We have 90 minutes in all, so we need to stick as closely as we can to the time that's been allotted. So I want to go for the next 6-minute presentation to the Assistant Secretary Rico Fos, who's with the Office of Migrant Workers Affairs in the Department of Foreign Affairs in the Philippines. Assistant Secretary is a diplomat, a lawyer, a public servant with more than 23 years with the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs, and currently he's the head of the Office of Migrant Workers Affairs and has been assisting in the mass repatriation of overseas Filipinos who have been affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. To the Assistant Secretary, sir.
Thank you very much, Craig. Excellencies, colleagues, partners in the Migration Network. Good morning there in New York. Good afternoon there in Geneva and Europe, and good evening here from the Philippines. Migration has always been close to our hearts. Being a migrant-sending country for 4 decades, the Philippines has since developed migration governance framework and established institutions to serve over 10 million Filipinos abroad. Actual practice and experience enabled our active engagement in the intergovernmental negotiations and later on in national implementation of the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. The Philippines, as you know, is a GCM champion country from the Asia-Pacific region. And not long ago, the Philippine Foreign Affairs Undersecretary Sara Lu Arriola chaired the Asia-Pacific GCM Regional Review. Excellencies, the Asia-Pacific region has seen a large-scale trends in the movement of its people based on the 2020 Asia-Pacific Migration Report. The region is home to 40% of all migrants in the world. This big number of migrants coming from and living in the region has, in one way or another, has been subjected to inequalities persisting in the region. If not addressed, it could threaten social cohesion, economic growth, environmental sustainability, including resilience to climate and disaster risk. While migrants usually move in search for safer and better lives, they are also at risk of being left behind. They face complex human rights problems and vulnerabilities, particularly seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many have lost their jobs overseas and were forced to go back to countries of origin. Migrants sending countries embark on repatriation programs to bring home thousands of their stranded and distressed nationals. Many countries in our region have also placed efforts on making COVID-19 vaccines available to everyone, regardless of migration status. The COVID-19 pandemic emphasized our continuing challenge for governments and stakeholders to continue, despite any crisis, in upholding decent treatment and protection to migrants in the whole migration cycle. The Asia Pacific Review underscored the GCM as an effective tool that utilizes the benefits and advantages of migration in addressing inequalities. Similarly, among the key outcomes of the roundtables for the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development was the daunting realization that our efforts must address inequality and the adverse impacts of climate and disaster displacements as drivers of precarious migrations. As a response, governments should be able to provide non-discriminatory access to decent work and social protection, regular pathways for migration, and inclusion of migration status in disaggregating data are needed to be enhanced and institutionalized through a multi-stakeholder approach. These goals are fully aligned with the objectives of the GCMs. At this point, allow me to share some of the milestones of my country's national implementation of the GCM. First, a key part of our GCM implementation is the addition of a new chapter in the Philippine Development Plan, focusing on international migration and development. The program and policies contained in that new chapter are mainly aimed at ensuring the safety and protection of both Filipinos migrants overseas and foreign nationals in the Philippines as they contribute to sustainable development. Second, the Philippine government also partnered with IOM Philippines and other UN agencies in conducting BRIDGE program. BRIDGE aims to implement GCM Objective 6 on ethical recruitment and Objective 21 on return and reintegration by connecting the programs on recruitment and return and reintegration. Third, our country is now moving forward towards integrating into a single agency all mandates of separate but interrelated migration-related government offices to a more effective and efficient delivery of services to the Filipino migrants in the diaspora. And finally, this pandemic has seen the massive repatriation of over 1 million Filipinos returning to the Philippines since the outbreak of COVID-19. For those who could not be repatriated, financial assistance and on-site services were provided to them. All this would not have been possible without GCM as our blueprint in responding to the crisis and addressing inequalities in all stages of migration. Excellencies, we at the Philippines and the Asia Pacific region valued GCM as a primary framework in addressing gaps in its migration governance framework. The GCM and the SDGs are reminders for all of us to be inclusive and to leave no one behind in responding to crisis. No one is safe until everyone is safe, said the UN Secretary General. I close this intervention with the challenge that inequalities faced by migrants, particularly women migrants, children, and informal sector workers, should be addressed through adequate safeguards to uphold migrants' rights, safety, and dignity, regardless of their migration status. I encourage all to continue working towards the progressive realization of the GCM objectives and the SDGs, keeping in mind that our respective national and global action plans should always be for the benefit of migrants and should contribute to sustainable development. Thank you. Maraming salamat po. Back to you, Craig.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Rico Foss, for that as well. Fascinating to hear that the Asia-Pacific region is actually host to 40% of the world's migrants. And of course, from that vantage point, you can see, as you mentioned, Assistant Secretary, the persistent inequalities, the leaving of migrants behind in contradiction to the principles of the SDGs, and those stories about how COVID actually forced the movement and repatriation of often distressed migrants, I think something we all need to be very conscious of. But I like very much as well the way you focus on the Global Compact on Migration as a tool for member states and as a blueprint and as something that is actually useful and helpful in the management of migration challenges, a point that you emphasized more than once there, including the multi-stakeholder approaches as well. And interesting to hear how the Philippines is integrating the Global Compact even into its national development plan. And we all heard your lesson at the end about paying attention to the need for safeguards for migrants, including women and children and informal workers as well. So thank you for that. We're going to go to the next speaker on our panel, who is Mr. Eduardo Qua, who's the head of international relations of the Portuguese High Commission for Migration. Among other responsibilities, he has the EU Fundamental Rights Agency National Liaison Officer, and he represents the High Commission for Migration in other fora, such as the European Integration Network, the OECD Working Party on Migration, the National Commission for Human Rights. He's previously worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with Portuguese communities living abroad. And in 2015, he joined the High Commission for Migration. Over to Mr. Eduardo Qua.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, dear participants, excellencies. First of all, I would like to thank the kind invitation to participate at this initiative. The High Commission for Migration would like to greet the organization for promoting this event and to encourage the debate surrounding the efforts towards the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. Portuguese participation represents a sign of confidence and solidarity with the Global Compact and with the UN Network on Migration. The champion countries are distinguished from the others by their interest, willingness, and ability to implement the Global Compact, looking for better management of migrations at national and international level. In this way, the champion countries can and should contribute to the exchange of good practices in the implementation of the plan, allowing other countries to build national plans or other activities based on lessons learned. Allow me to say without hesitation, Portugal is fully and deeply committed with this idea. In fact, as you know, Portugal was one of the first United Nations countries to develop a national plan for the implementation of the Global Compact, approved in 20 of August of 2019. Recognizing the importance of having good reception and integration mechanisms, Portugal considers the establishment of partnerships with countries of origin and transit relevant, but also sees the Global Compact as an opportunity for the improvement and deepening of national migration policies, in line with other instruments of national public policies. The national plan reinforces the recognition by the Portuguese authorities of the relevance of matters related to the promotion of legal channels for safe and orderly migration, closely linked to strong integration measures. Before the adoption of the national plan, migration was already a prominent issue in terms of public policies, with the plans for immigrant integration since 2007 to 2010, and a second one from 2011 to 2013, or the strategic plan for migration between 2015 and 2020 being pointed out as examples. The current national plan follows the structure of 23 objectives of the Global Compact on Migration in order to cover all the relevant dimensions of the migratory phenomenon. We have 97 measures in total. The plan is shared by the member of the government responsible for the area of the Presidency of Council of Ministers and integrates several members of the government: Foreign Affairs, Interior Affairs, Labor, Solidarity and Social Security, Health, Education, among others, following the whole of government approach. Portugal promotes this whole of government approach that combines tailored integration measures with providing easier access to public services and also to our welfare system. Allow me to highlight the progress made in some areas with concrete measures. The reformulation of the Portuguese language courses, aiming to broaden the coverage, including more institutions that can access funding to implement these courses, and also to include migrants still in regularization processes. We introduced a significant set of changes to provide a more adjusted response to the needs of adult, migrant, and refugee people learning the Portuguese language, intending to a better social and professional integration. Also, the immediate allocation of the social security number, regardless of migrants' legal status, allowing them access to social support and also facilitating the regularization process. Expand the number of offices specialized in supporting migrants finding employment from 11 to 23, extension of the periods for the concession and renewal of residence permits, or the creation of the new e-visa portal, which, for example, allows migrants to consult the status of their visa application electronically. We also create a new model of residence permit card, including social security, national health system, and fiscal number as the Portuguese citizen card. We also point out the specific attention to the need to embrace whole of government, whole of society, but also child-sensitive and gender-responsive approaches in order to implement the Global Compact anchored in international human rights laws. Particularly in a pandemic crisis context, where challenges must be overcome in order to protect those who are the most vulnerable groups, and migrants are often part of those groups more exposed to these situations, developing and strengthening networks as well as involving all stakeholders in the creation and design of integration policies are essential to do so. In this sense, we support a cross-sectorial common approach involving all relevant stakeholders that promotes dialogue and also recognize migrants as part of our social fabric with a role in Portugal's construction. So, in the first stage, ensuring proper protection was fundamental. That meant guaranteeing access to healthcare and social rights. Regarding the COVID-19, the Portuguese authorities had taken several steps to safeguard migrants and refugees from being in a greater vulnerability situation. Residence permits were extended until the 31 December 2021. Immigrants and asylum seekers with pending applications for residence permits were considered in a regular situation and with access to the same rights and support as permanent residents, including health, social support, employment, and housing rights. Also, a simplified procedure of applications for granting and renewal of residence permits was implemented in May 2020. And the exception from user fees in cases of diagnosis and treatment of COVID-19 also applicable to all foreign citizens, irrespectively of their legal status. I think we could mention with some pride that Portugal already started to vaccinate the migrants on an irregular situation and without health number. For us, this is a question of human rights, and our approach is very simple: to inform, clarify, and to act on behalf of those potentially on risk of exclusion. Finally, and before finishing my intervention, allow me to reinforce the Portuguese commitment towards a better discussion on migration and this High Commission for Migration availability to develop a dialogue between our different continents to better share our practices and knowledge, receiving at the same time the best inputs from your experience and expertise. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Eduardo Qua, for your comments there. Again, emphasizing the Global Compact as an opportunity to strengthen national migration systems and pointing to the need for more legal channels, employment opportunities, COVID services, resident permits, language training, obviously access to public services and welfare, and sharing with us as well the national planning process that Portugal has undertaken with its interagency whole of government approach. Very much appreciated. We've got about 45 minutes left, so we are over time, but we're going to move right along and count on all of our speakers to try to stay within 6 minutes so we have some time for conversation as well. And with that, I'm very happy next to give the floor to Ms. Armida Salcia Alisjabana, who is the UN Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP. We're going to be hearing from Ms. Alisjabana by a video message. I'll say that prior to joining ESCAP, she was professor of economics at Universitas Padjadjaran in Bandung, Indonesia. And since 2016, she served as director for the Center for Sustainable Development Global Studies and vice chair of the Indonesian Academy of Sciences. So over to the colleagues for the video message from Ms. Alisjabana.
Excellencies, Ambassador Enrique Manalo, Permanent Representative of the Philippines to the United Nations, Ambassador Francisco Duarte Lopez, Permanent Representative of Portugal to United Nations, representatives of the United Nations Network on Migration stakeholders from Asia and the Pacific and Europe, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to join this very timely side event on the Global Compact for Migration, or GCM. International migration has been a key accelerator of sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific and beyond. There are almost 107 million people from our region living outside their countries of birth. They make up about 40% of the world's migrants and contribute to economic and social development, both within and beyond our borders. There are also some 65 million international migrants living in Asia and the Pacific, 70% of whom come from within the region. They embody the region's dynamism, adaptability, and future, each person seeking to better themselves and contribute to the communities from which they come and the communities to which they migrate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in March 2021, countries in Asia and the Pacific conducted a review of implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. They were joined by a large and diverse group of stakeholders. The meeting was chaired by the Philippines, supported by Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Thailand. It used ESCAP's intergovernmental platform and was supported by the Regional UN Network on Migration for Asia and the Pacific. Let me summarize the main findings of our meeting as they relate to the review of the 2030 agenda this year and suggest some follow-up actions. First, member states reiterated their commitment to implementing the GCM and the 2030 agenda. They noted that achieving SDGs would further the implementation of the GCM and vice versa. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, has further hindered the regional implementation of the 2030 agenda. The Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development confirmed that the region is unlikely to achieve the 70 goals by 2030. All SDGs under review at the HLPF this year relate directly to migration, and they must include migrants if the goals are to be achieved. SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth is particularly relevant for Asia and the Pacific. In a region where the informal sector of the economy is strong and temporary labor migration dominant, it is important to have full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, including migrants. Many countries still lack safe and regular pathways for migration, presenting deep or steep challenges to migrant workers in the informal sector, particularly domestic workers. The adverse effects of inequalities and climate change result in unsafe and disorderly migration. In this context, it is crucially important to implement well-planned and managed migration policies, invest in skills development, supply social protection, and act on the climate crisis in line with SDG 10 on reduced inequalities and SDG 13 on climate action. Second, the region faces challenges in implementing migration policies that comply with national and international laws. SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions under review this year is also relevant in this context. The smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons are deeply embedded in the socio-economic dynamics of the region. There are still obstacles to birth registration, especially for migrants in irregular situations. Alternatives to detention should be explored. Too often, age and sex disaggregated data on migrants and their circumstances are not available. Countries should protect and fulfill the human rights of all migrants, regardless of their status. Such policies must be gender responsive and child sensitive. Third, despite these challenges, the region has made progress in cooperation, partnership, and a whole of government and whole of society approach in implementing the GCM, including at subnational levels, in line with SDG 17 on partnership for the goals. Since most migration in Asia and the Pacific is regional in nature, these approaches and initiatives are very promising. Due to the large and growing scale of migration between Asia-Pacific countries, it is important to foster and strengthen more bilateral, sub-regional, regional, and cross-regional initiatives through ASEAN, the Eurasian Economic Union, regional consultative processes, and the many bilateral agreements in Asia and the Pacific. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, let me call on the participants from Asia and Pacific, in particular the GCM champion countries, and the many stakeholders from the region to lead by example and collaborate with one another in realizing our GCM commitments. By doing so, we will increase our chances of fully implementing the 2030 Agenda and its call to leave no one behind. For the future, let us make migration a priority in our annual review of the 2030 Agenda here at the HLPF, at the APFSD, and at the other regional forums on sustainable development organized by our sister regional commissions. We have made an excellent start in 2021 by providing an opportunity for the outcomes of the Asia-Pacific Review to be fed into the deliberations of the APFSD. ESCAP stands ready to support its member states in making migration a central element of the regular review of the 2030 Agenda in Asia-Pacific and beyond. Let us work together to achieve SDGs and ensure that no migrant is left behind. I thank you and I wish you a very successful and informative side event.
Well, our thanks to Undersecretary General Alice Chabana, both for that statement, but also for her leadership and the leadership of ESCAP throughout this process, and obviously for sharing with us some of the challenges, but also lessons emerging from the Asia-Pacific region. We'll go now to Mr. Ola Henriksen, who is the Regional Director of the International Organization for Migration's Brussels office. Mr. Henriksen has substantial knowledge of global and EU migration issues stemming from more than 25 years of experience in the asylum and migration sector at the national and international levels. Prior to joining IOM in 2019, he was the Director General for Migration and Asylum at the Swedish Ministry of Justice. Over to Mr. Henriksen.
Fuck. Nu bara la den här av. Hello, can you hear me?
We do hear you. Thank you.
Sorry, something went wrong. We just went blank. Sorry. So thank you very much for the floor. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be here with you to reflect on the GCM developments in the UNECE region. I would like to start by giving you some of the major highlights of the GCM regional review for the UNECE region that took place in November last year. It was the first of the reviews that took place and was attended by representatives from 40 member states. It was organized by IOM as the network coordinator in coordination with the UN Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE. The regional UN Migration Network and the 14 national networks were important contributors to building to this review. To note from this is the regional review was preceded by a multi-stakeholder consultation whose rapporteur shared the outcomes at the intergovernmental meeting. 28 member states contributed with voluntary submissions, as did 17 stakeholders, all available on the network's website. 24 panelists led a two-day rich discussion attended by almost 500 participants. I would like to take the opportunity to thank member states and stakeholders for their contributions to the regional review, and I'm convinced the outcomes will inform the International Migration Review Forum. Across the UNECE region, significant progress has been witnessed in the implementation of the GCM. Yet participants were anonymous in expressing the need for strengthening regional and global cooperation in advancing the objectives and guiding principles. During the discussions, it was recognized that it is important that migrants are not left behind and are part of recovery. Also, several themes emerge as point for reflection and discussions. Drivers of migration within and to the region were acknowledged to include conflict, climate change, shifting demographic patterns, and the pursuit of better economic opportunities. Ensuring protection and upholding the human rights of migrants is of particular concern. The inclusion of migrant voices in policy development and the participation of civil society actors and other stakeholders were viewed as important approaches, and combating discrimination and promoting social cohesion were emphasized as increasingly explicit aims of member states and stakeholders. Indeed, member states have been able to demonstrate achievements within their national context across the region and globally, in cooperation with an expanding range of partners. At the same time, efforts must be sustained in order to achieve the aspirations of the GCM for the benefits of migrants and societies in countries of origin, transit, and destination. As 2020 was coming to an end, the UN Migration Network held its second annual meeting. The UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed recognized the efforts of governments and stakeholders in advancing the GCM. She also encouraged the Migration Network to support member states to translate their commitments into action. In a wider context of global government, it is important that the GCM feeds into established mechanisms and vice versa. In this regard, 10 IOM projects, of which 6 are from the UNECE region, were recently recognized as good practice. They aim to advance the GCM while contributing to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals. The network's proposed framework for the regional review process. The regional reviews are not meant to be a one-off meeting conference, but rather a series of conversations on GCM implementation in a regional context that will inform the IMRF. In line with this vision, IOM, with the support of the Migration Network, held sub-regional symposia in Central and East Asia and in East Europe. The discussions at the two events highlighted the importance of strengthening capacities for building an even more solid evidence-based and stronger migration governance. In response to this, the Migration Network commenced initial discussions among UN partners on multi-country projects at the sub-regional level to be submitted to the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund. This aims to further strengthen national capacities in collecting and utilizing accurate data as a basis for evidence policies. During the regional review and ensuing symposia, some member states also expressed interest in briefings, including on becoming GCM champion countries. We would like to thank the government of Portugal for its unwavering commitment and support for the many briefings carried out in the UNECE region. To advance the objectives of the GCM, it would be important for other states in the region to join Portugal as a champion country. As preparations in the lead up to the IMRF move ahead, IOM continues to work with member states to advance the GCM. We are planning a preparatory meeting in early 2022 to ensure all member states are aware of the reporting modalities. To conclude, we very much look forward to your participation at the highest level at the International Migration Review Forum, so we can continue advancing our commitments towards safe, orderly, and regular migration. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much for sharing all that information. That's IOM Regional Director Ola Henriksen. Fascinating to hear about the ECE Regional Review with 40 states, broad multi-stakeholder inputs, dozens of experts, hundreds of participants, and all of those interesting lessons emerging from that. Thank you very much to you, and also to IOM for its leadership and engagement here. We're going to go to our next panelist now. We're going to, continuing on this multi-stakeholder theme, we're going to be hearing from Ms. Chihoko Asada Miyakawa, who is the Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific at the International Labour Organization, ILO. She oversees ILO's operations in 36 ILO member states in Asia and the Pacific. And prior to this, she represented the Japanese government at the ILO governing body as a part of her role as Assistant Minister for International Labor Affairs within the Japanese Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. Over to Ms. Chihoko Asada Miyakawa.
Thank you, Craig. Distinguished representatives of governments of the Philippines and Portugal, distinguished delegates and panel members, stakeholder representatives, UN colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to speak to you today at this high-level side event during the High-Level Political Forum 2021. The centrality of work to migration flows in the region is clear. The ILO has estimated that in 2019, that there were 169 million migrant workers worldwide, which accounted for 69% of all migrants of working age. While noting the comprehensive approach of GCM reflected in its 23 objectives, I would like to touch upon 3 thematic areas which are of great importance to making migration safe, orderly, and regular in Asia and the Pacific. First area is fair recruitment. Fair and ethical recruitment has been on the agenda of policymakers, social partners, civil society, and UN agencies for several years. As a result, several positive developments can be noted. These include, 1, an emerging practice of the prohibition of worker-paid recruitment fees in laws. 2, private sector initiatives on responsible recruitment. 3, international guidance on fair recruitment, including definition of fees and related costs. Yet, recruitment and migration costs generally remain high in the region, and there is much scope to eliminate worker-paid recruitment fees and related costs, thereby increasing the amount of earnings that is left with workers and their families. I would encourage all countries in the region to introduce legislation to remove worker-paid recruitment fees and related costs and undertake regular surveys to monitor the extent of such costs using the methodology developed for SDG Target 10.7. The second area is about decent work. Deficits in decent work were highlighted during the pandemic. One of these is that women migrants continue to face particular risks in domestic work where protections of labor law often do not apply. Also, while migrant workers commonly double their earnings after migration, their wages are still among the lowest in the destination country and are sometimes not paid in full. Among migrants, women on average earn less. Still, we do see several positive developments with respect to working conditions. These include ratification of ILO conventions, the development of new laws, the adoption of ASEAN consensus on the protection and promotion of rights of migrant workers, and support services to migrants by trade unions and civil society organizations. We urge that governments include migrant workers in social protection and income support measures in the same way that nationals are covered. We also urge governments to afford domestic workers the same protection as other workers. Third area is about labor mobility. Throughout the region, there are pathways for regular labor migration across different skill levels. But legal channels are limited in relation to employer demand for workers or the size of labor pool seeking employment. Legal pathways are also often costly and cumbersome, particularly for workers in elementary occupations, encouraging irregular migration. Enhancing the effectiveness of legal channels will make migration more safe, orderly, and regular. The current economic and social transition in the global economy as well as the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, sharply affect migration in Asia and the Pacific, and put pressure on policymakers and regulators to develop timely policy responses and innovative approaches to guarantee effective management of migration. Partnerships among governments, the private sector, worker organizations, CSOs, and other stakeholders will be central in meeting these challenges and delivering the Global Compact on Migration. The UN Network for Migration will need to play its part and has indeed worked very well together in delivering the regional review on the implementation of the GCM. ILO is proud to be part of the UN Network on Migration at the global and regional level, and to work side by side with members of UN family in supporting governments and stakeholders in the Asia-Pacific region to uphold and promote migrants' rights and orderly migration. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Assistant Director General Chihoko Asada Miyakawa, for sharing that and those 3 points of emphasis on fair recruitment, decent work for migrants, and labor mobility and pathways. We'll go now to our next speaker, which is somebody well known to anyone working in this field internationally, Ms. Michelle Lavoie, who is the director of the Platform of International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants. We know it as PICUM. And as director of the organization, she has led the organization for nearly 2 decades in advocating for undocumented migrants' human rights within European institutions and global institutions. She's played a key role as a board member for several civil society organizations at the global and EU levels working on migration issues. And we'll hear now from Michelle Lavoie. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you so much, Craig, and also to the organizers for this invitation to contribute to the panel. So Ola from IOM gave input on the panel on the regional consultation for Europe, or for the UNISA region, and I was actually the rapporteur for the multi-stakeholder part of that. So I'd like to share some thoughts from that process. The first 2 points are a bit more general, and then the third point is looking a little bit at some of the contents. So the first point on the process. The multi-stakeholder consultation part of the Europe, or the UNISA regional review, was actually organized by the UN Migration Network Secretariat, and it was actually very helpful for us as civil society because we have a very good relationship with the civil society liaison, and it actually helped and made the process very smooth. As Ola mentioned, there were 17 written contributions by stakeholders, 16 of which were civil society organizations, cities, regional human rights mechanisms, and 1 was the EU itself. And the reason why I also wanted to highlight this, because for us as civil society, it's very useful and important that these written contributions are on the website, that they're very visible, and it seems rather transparent. This is quite different from, for example, the GFMD process, which doesn't have the similar written contributions. But it's very interesting because there are so many contributions from the UNISA region. If you compare, for example, a country level report versus a civil society report from the same country. So it's important that there is this transparency because the nuances of the implementation will actually be more finer. Another point on process is that we were very glad as civil society to finally hear from colleagues from Central Asia, the CIS republics, Russia, and this was actually thanks to Russian interpretation. So we really are grateful to the UN Migration Network for allowing that, but also for the very specific outreach that civil society and some institutional partners played in trying to get the civil society colleagues from those regions to join. And it's important not only for civil society from that sub-region, but also throughout the region to have their voices heard, because we've seen that criminalization of migration is a reality throughout the whole region. And this means not only criminalizing migrants, but also those who are human rights defenders who provide them assistance. The Resomer project actually has found that there have been 171 known cases of human rights defenders who have been criminalized in recent years, just in the EU alone. And the second point I wanted to mention then is on governance. So we are all very aware that individual governments adopt the Global Compact on Migration. But what does this actually say for regional level governance? And here I wanted to make a point on the EU. So there were 17 multi-stakeholder contributions. The EU was one of them. It's included on the website as a multi-stakeholder. And it's interesting because there are 18 out of 27 of the EU member states who have adopted the Global Compact on Migration, 2/3. But what happens when the EU itself proposes legislation which backtracks on commitments from the Global Compact? And here I wanted to make the point on the proposal that the European Commission made in September last year for the Pact on Asylum and Migration. So it made this proposal 2 years after 2/3 of the member states adopted the Global Compact. We are concerned that basically the proposals, if they were adopted, now it's being the process where the European Parliament and the Council are negotiating the text of all of these proposals. But basically we're concerned that it would lead to more detention. This is through the Screening Regulation of Borders proposal, the Asylum and Border Procedure proposal, where the pre-screening could lead to detention of up to 10 days. There could be no judicial overview of detention. With the Asylum and Border Procedures, detention would be broadly applied. If there were a crisis situation, it could last up to 9.5 months. And children would be included in the pre-screening procedure. In the Asylum and Border Procedures, children who are 12 years and older who are with their families would also be included. Children who are below 12 years would not be included, and those who are unaccompanied until 18 years would not be included. But this is also problematic because this proposal draws a line through adolescence. So it doesn't actually treat all children as equal until 18. So we're concerned basically, and it's not entirely clear how the Global Compact responds to, for example, in the EU region, the regional level of governance concerning some of these proposals. And then very briefly, just some of the points that came out in our multi-stakeholder consultation. We had a whole discussion on Objective 11 borders. And I would say the key word in our discussion is violence. We heard about violence, summary expulsions, forced returns, pushbacks at sea, at land, without due process. This has actually been mentioned by the UN Special Rapporteur in his recent report on pushbacks, which has found this quite endemic to the Europe region. So the recommendation is that there's more transparent governance, there's independent monitoring at borders, including by national human rights institutions. We also looked at Objective 13, using migration detention only as a measure of last resort, working towards alternatives. As I mentioned, the proposal from the European Commission goes against the spirit of this commitment. It actually would increase it. So there's really a need to focus on alternatives to detention that are in community-based individual assistance. We looked at Objective 15 on access to services, and this is one I wanted to highlight because we've actually seen within PICUM since I would say the beginning of this year and monitoring the rollout of the COVID vaccine in the European Union that there's at least, well actually in the Europe region in general, there's at least 7 European countries that have clarified that undocumented migrants could be included in the national vaccination strategies. They're Belgium, France, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, and the UK. Why do I want to highlight this? Because this is an example of actually realizing some of the objectives 15 of the Global Compact, because it is extending services to all regardless of migration status. So that civil society has actually played a key role in all of these countries, which are seen as somewhat promising practices in making that possible. On Objective 5 on regular pathways, we looked at labor migration. So recommending to expand regular pathways, as a number have already said on this panel, with regulatory frameworks for mobility of workers across skills levels. We looked at family reunification, and one of the specific points was to eliminate the barriers and obstacles for children to be reunited with their families. And we also looked at regularization. And the key finding for us, the multi-stakeholder thing, is that regularization is far from being taboo in the EU. We've heard on the panel about Portugal. Italy also had a regularization last year between June and August. 220,000 people applied. Only 5% of applications have been examined so far, so we're still waiting to see the final numbers. But Ireland also this year, in April, proposed a regularization for people to apply by the end of 2021. So this is an ongoing policy tool that's being used. So I'd like to just end there, also to keep it short on time, but with the key word of multi-stakeholder. I think a number of the panelists have highlighted this in their interventions. We've actually seen that a lot of the progressive things on the ground for the Global Compact can be achieved, but it really only is possible through multi-stakeholder contributions, and especially civil society playing a key role. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle Lavoie, Director of PICUM, for that emphasis on multi-stakeholder participation, transparency, the need for interpretation and outreach, but also the focus on governance and the actual implementation of the Global Compact and fears about policies that might backslide on the Global Compact principles, violence at borders, forced returns and pushbacks, overuse of detention, denial of services, and the need for regularization opportunities, lots of other things mentioned there. We're going to go to our next speaker now, who is Mr. Ray Assis, Program Coordinator for Advocacy and Campaigns at Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants. Mr. Assis represents APMM as focal point for the migrants constituency of the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, which is a regional CSO platform that initiates and facilitates civil society organization engagement on the Sustainable Development Goals in a number of intergovernmental processes. He works to try to create and use space for grassroots migrant engagement, the most important, ultimately, voices of all in these processes that Ray Assis helps to represent. Ray Assis, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, colleagues in the civil society, migrants' rights advocates, warm solidarity greetings. On behalf of the Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants, I extend our appreciation for the invitation to speak in this panel and share our insights on the Asia Pacific Regional Review of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, and the development challenges facing migrants today, as well as highlight recommendations for building an effective and inclusive path to achieve the 2030 Agenda and identify actionable next steps in the GCM implementation. As a regional institution for migrants and migration, the APMM has always worked for empowerment of stakeholders, specifically grassroots migrants. We believe that the GCM and Agenda 2030 will not be truly responsive, realizable, and sustainable if they are not grounded in the concrete realities and aspirations of migrants, especially if they neglect to involve migrants themselves in all themes, spaces, and levels. Discussions around the GCM and Agenda 2030 that involve migrants have become even more important and urgent as migrants continue to reel from the impacts of the pandemic. Migrants face joblessness, widespread displacement, absence of sufficient aid and support, and aggravation of their existing vulnerabilities in their living and working places. The post-pandemic scenario does not give much confidence to migrants as prevalent state narratives of recovery and building back better are still very much within the pre-pandemic development paradigm and too often fail to factor migrants into the equation. Further shrinking of civic space has also been observed under the pandemic. First, we have seen heightened repression, extended lockdowns, movement control, and militarization. Second, design of engagement arenas for civil society and grassroots stakeholders is not sufficiently cognizant of the organizational and human realities on the ground, and this makes opportunities for meaningful participation more difficult than before. Amidst these conditions, grassroots migrants and advocates have persisted, endeavoring to ensure that the perspectives and agendas of migrants are effectively articulated. In the lead up to the regional review of the GCM, CSO participating in the ESCAP and UN Migration Network initiated multi-stakeholder consultations work together to consolidate inputs from the ground, pop up the voices of grassroots stakeholders themselves, and encourage the state-led review process to engage with and uphold the positions and recommendations of CSOs. I would like to highlight that the multi-stakeholder consultations, in our view, aligned with civil society's call to make the GCM process open, inclusive, and transparent. The 4 joint statements, including an introductory statement resulting from the consultations, reflected the stakeholders' unity on key issues and recommendations. All these statements were submitted read, and recorded during the regional review. Since the review process concluded, we have organized various follow-up initiatives, such as education, outreach, support to campaigns to make the GCM concrete, relatable, and digestible to migrants. Amidst all this, migrants have continued their campaigns to keep their issues from being sidelined. Last May 21, we organized with Bonigi Monitoring a virtual Migrants Echo conference on the regional review of the GCM. It was attended by 95 participants, mainly migrants, coming from more than 70 organizations across Asia Pacific. The conference made visible that despite the broad reach of the multi-stakeholder consultations, A, not many migrants are aware of the GCM, but once they know about it, they are interested and willing to participate. B, there is a pressing need for consultations with migrants on the GCM at the national level. And C, challenge of meaningful migrant access to intergovernmental processes persist. Based on our experience of the GCM regional review process, our knowledge of the existing situation and issues experienced by migrants, and with the goal of full participation and empowerment of migrants as right holders and development actors, we present the following recommendations relevant to GCM implementation and Agenda 2030. States and other stakeholders should, as appropriate, 1. Conduct a broad range of migrant-focused initiatives to help acquaint migrants with the GCM. This includes publicity and education materials, such as videos, infographics, surveys, consultations, and migrant stories. 2. Initiate national-level stakeholders consultations on the GCM and ensure a considerable percentage of participants are migrants. Such consultations should be done in origin countries, reaching out to returned migrants and families of migrants, as well as in destination countries where migrant organizations, trade unions working with migrants, and migrant-serving institutions and advocates can participate. Such consultations ensure language justice, from translation of GCM documents to mother languages of migrants to interpretation during activities involving migrants. 3. Continue to support regional multi-stakeholder consultations on the GCM, which should address key thematic issues such as debt bondage, detention, labor trafficking, and even education trafficking, or categories of migrants such as seafarers, fishers, domestic workers, among others. 4. Support CSO-led consultations and initiatives on the GCM that are underpinned by transparent, accountable, and democratic processes, whether nationally, regionally, or internationally. And finally, in relation to the high-level political forum, migrants' voices in this process should likewise be ensured in multiple ways, ranging from their contributions in voluntary national reports of governments to spotlight reports migrants groups wish to submit. To conclude my presentation, Mr. Chair, I wish to share with you quotes from several migrants who participated in our ECHO conference following the GCM regional review process. In their words, the GCM is a vehicle for the struggle of migrants. While it is a non-legally binding instrument, it can be used to advance the migrants' agenda. And finally, Mr. Chair, in the end, grassroots migrants' voices need to be at the forefront. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ray Assis, the coordinator of APMM, for reminding us that the perspectives of migrants themselves are absolutely vital to these processes and need to be and have been a part of the multi-stakeholder process, which he did find is open, inclusive, and transparent. That needs to be carried over into the next phase, and including into 2022. And emphasizing there as well the importance of education and outreach and translation to make all of this accessible to migrants themselves and to ensure their participations, and saying there that they are actually viewing the Global Compact on Migration as a vehicle for the struggle of migrants, their struggle for rights and dignity as well. So thank you very much for that. Now we are coming up on time, but I do want to take at least one intervention from the floor before we go over to our closing remarks from the Ambassador of Portugal. And I know that we do have at least one request, so I'm going to hand over for a quick intervention now to Minister Councillor Jitvikpa from Thailand. Minister Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And first of all, I'd like to thank the co-host, co-organizers for organizing this event and this important issue. Being actively involved in the formulation of GCM as well as the recent regional review, Thailand looks forward to a meaningful participation at the IMIF to be held next year. We're delighted that the GCM champion countries in New York have coordinated and prepared to have a joint statement in the HLPF this year. And we believe that the champion countries still need to work closely to sustain this momentum and further increase our visibility before the upcoming AMIF. And Thailand is presenting VNR this year. At the same time, we encourage countries to highlight implementation of the GCM in their own VNR reports. And we trust that the successful implementation will bring us steps closer to the full realization of the 2030 agenda. At the same time, as we supposed to embark on the decade of action, the COVID-19 pandemic has created disproportionate impact on migration and exposed vulnerabilities and inequalities migrants are facing. And as an integral part of our effort to build back better and achieve SDG, Thailand remains committed to advance implementation of GCM, especially through the access of social services and particularly education, healthcare, even in the time of COVID-19, and also to maintain the progress made on alternative to detention, especially for the case of migrant children. I have two questions. First of all, the first question, how the permanent mission of GCM champion countries in New York could do more to help further promote awareness and advance implementation of GCM in light of COVID-19 pandemic. And the second question, we appreciate the efforts to promote capacity building mechanism, including through the work of the UN Migration Network and the launch of Migration Hub, platform for knowledge sharing. And we think that information available and space for discussion have been very useful. We would like to hear more from the panelists on the way forward of plans to develop this further after the global review next year. Thank you.
Two terrific questions there. Thank you very much for that intervention, Minister Counselor. I'm going to ask that all of the panelists make a note of those two questions on the participation of the missions and on the educational portion and so on, so that this conversation can continue after we run out of time in a few minutes. And maybe we can see about having the organizers channel some of those ideas by email or otherwise to the Minister Counselor and to all of us who are learning from this process as we go along. With that, we've got permission to continue for an extra 5 minutes or so. So I ask your indulgence as we will turn over for final closing remarks to His Excellency Francisco Duarte Lopez, who is, you will know, the permanent representative of Portugal to the United Nations. Prior to his current position. I'm getting an echo there. That's better. Prior to his current position, he served as Director General for Foreign Policy, Director from 2014 to 2017, and the Director General for European Affairs. The United Nations. Over to His Excellency Francisco Duarte. And if before he begins, if I could ask others to please mute your microphone so we don't have that echo effect. Excellency, over to you. I think the ambassador's microphone needs to be unmuted.
Oh, sorry.
There we are.
Are you listening to me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, Director Moki. And Excellencies, dear colleagues, today's discussion was really very enriching, and it wouldn't be easy to sum up. Let me first start with a word on this regional review of the GCM in the Europe region. As you noted, hundreds of government and the progress made in the implementation of the Global Compact was evident. Regions are crucial in our stock-taking exercise. The regional reviews filled the compact with life, as was clear from today's interventions. The Europe Regional Review also brought additional resources for the implementation of the compact through the migration MPTF, the multi-partner trust fund that was already mentioned today. Overall, it was indicated that the pandemic had added urgency and relevance to our work in support of the implementation of the GCM objectives was also clearly identified. And the whole of society approach was encouraged, and the rich interventions from stakeholders further highlighted the importance of this approach. But of course, the Europe Regional Review also showed the limitations as regards GCM implementation currently and pointed to the challenges, such as an increase in vulnerabilities faced by migrants. And we also heard today about the challenges faced by the European Union in balancing national positions are sometimes diverse. Portugal, my own country, has long advocated for a human rights-based approach to migration and has tried to address the increased vulnerabilities of migrants during this pandemic. We followed the compass of the GCM when we granted temporary residency rights to all irregular migrants and asylum seekers, as you have heard from the Portuguese High Commission on Migration today. And because we cannot leave anyone behind in our recovery efforts, our national recovery takes migrants into consideration, namely when it comes to decent housing. We want to structurally reduce inequalities between migrants and nationals and to provide equal rights for all. In order to do that, today we have in Portugal more than 100 local support centers spread across the country. These proximity services provide support for migrants in their integration process, namely regarding documentation, access to Portuguese language courses, housing, and education. So, dear colleagues, to said in the first day of this HLPF, migration is important to deliver the whole of the 2030 agenda. But of course, its relevance is even more evident and explicit when it comes to SDG 10 on inequalities, which is under review this year at the HLPF. So for this reason, migration must be in these 2 weeks on the agenda, from the ministerial declaration to the side events, from the thematic discussions. COVID-19 shows the need for a more effective governance structure and for inclusive action when it comes to migration. And even if it looks a paradox, the pandemic has only made the Global Compact for Migration more relevant. I hope this event today was useful in showcasing lessons learned from our 2 regional reviews and in charting the way ahead from the end of the regional review process to a successful first IMRF next year. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for those closing remarks. Thanks for bringing us to a good conclusion. I just want to thank all of our speakers and our co-hosts, ESCAP, Permanent Missions of the Philippines and Portugal, United Nations Network on Migration, all of our experts and participants. Thank you very much, and the conversation continues.
Ano sa kaya?
Sir, yung sa speech niyo po,